What could be better than printing useless stuff? Printing giant useless stuff. Yes, today, you guessed it, we're looking at the KOBRA MAX again. I did an initial unboxing a while back and I was happy to report some positive findings. But now I've had some time to print with this thing. So today, we're going to cover everything I've printed so far. I want to break down some of the strengths and weaknesses that I've identified in this time printing. From there, we're going to touch on a couple of the issues I've seen with print quality, before wrapping up with why I decided to disassemble this multicolor unit. Finally, I have a reason to print all of the giant things. Thank goodness. So before I get into some of the prints I've done since the last time we spoke about this machine, I want to recap my findings from the first video. So for starters, I wanted to print a car for my kid. I had this chocolate PLA from Overture laying around, so that naturally steered me towards this UPS van print. I had a lot of first layer issues, but once I dialed that in by tightening up some of the components, this is what we were left with. Of course, the first layer was cooked, so we can't really look at that. But beyond that, the top surface of the print was also not great. It was super rough. Otherwise, the features of this model were replicated super well. All the lines came out really clean, the layers stuck nicely. This was good news. From there, I wanted to prove out the multicolor system a little bit, and I ran off a couple of these multicolor Nacho prints. This didn't max out the build plate or stress the build volume in any way. It was just a couple of small multicolor models to show that the system did in fact work. And I was happy to report that they came out super well as well. There weren't any defects or artifacts. There was no color bleed happening. The boundaries between the color changes were nice and crisp. Everything looked very good. Then finally I moved on to something a little bit more intricate in terms of the model design. I ran off this model of the Halo 3 map Valhalla. Now this map had a lot of finer small details as well as bigger, more robust features to kind of compare the performance of the machine on those different attributes. And for filament, I used this gradient that I got from ChiTu Systems to show off the height change throughout the map. It turned out really cool. Now the fine features turned out really good on this. The trees and the small structures, that sort of stuff looks way better than I expected a machine this big to be able to replicate. But the big features, like the walls and the rocks and that sort of stuff, and the big, flat, smooth surfaces, that's where we found our first quality issue. It looks like this machine has a weakness for ringing and vibration artifacts. So when we look at these big flat surfaces, you can see a lot of wobbles and ghosting present. And that was kind of a bummer to see because so far this machine had really impressed me and exceeded my expectations, honestly. So it was kind of a mixed bag of results, but that was all I was able to get through in my first review of this machine. This printer's big, and because it prints so large, the prints take a long time. What can I say? But now we've had more time, friends. So let's see what else this sucker's good for, shall we? You guys asked for it. We got merch. There's a bunch to choose from. Look at that, it's Spaghetti Nacho. You got the Keo logo on the back, of course. If you saw my Bamboo H2D video, you'll understand why this shirt's a thing. When we do a 4 and 4, we rate every printer. If you wear this shirt, you're a perfect 10, baby. This is Paul, he's a goober. There's other shirts, keoprints.com, get you some. Straight off the bat, while printing with this machine, there's been a couple issues. But none have been more persistent or more ever-present than the ones that stem from the ACE. Now I say that they're issues, none of these have really ruined any prints or anything like that, but there have been annoyances. Is annoyance a word?
Here's an answer from dictionary.com and thekcontentauthority.com.
Refers to a feeling of mild irritation or discomfort. Annoyances. It all started when I tried to load the filament into this third bay here. The machine recognized the filament and began to automatically feed it, or it sounded like it was trying to automatically feed it. But no matter what I did, it would not actually pull the filament in. And then finally at one point it did catch the filament, but it began to spit it into the inside of the machine instead of into a tube into the printer. So like it was rolling up inside the box. So I figured there was something jammed up inside the lines or something, or maybe one of the tubes on the inside came disconnected, and that's why it was going inside of the box instead of into the tubes to the machine. Now this is something that happens from time to time with my Bamboo AMSs, so I'm kind of used to taking these apart and replacing the tubes when they wear out, or popping one back on if it's come disconnected from the little hydraulic fittings in there. That's kind of normal, that's okay. The bummer about this setup is the fact that these tubes are buried really deep inside of that unit. You can't access them without taking everything apart. So I started tearing into this ACE, and to my surprise, once I got down to the tubes, There was no clog. Nothing was disconnected. Everything was in its place as it was meant to be. So I had no reason for this bay to be clogged up. There was no reason why this machine shouldn't be feeding the filament incorrectly. So reluctantly, I put it back together, even though I spent the time taking it apart. And you know what? It worked fine after that. Like nothing happened. Poor little Ace just wanted a little bit of attention. So with the Ace fixed, as well as my soft, smooth brain would allow it to be fixed, we moved on. The next project I wanted to work on was this rollback for my kid. He specifically told me he wanted a pink rollback, and he wanted it big enough that he could tow his other cars on the bed of it. Now I print him a lot of these cars, so I threw one of those old models into the slicer and scaled it according to what I printed it at previously, because I didn't remember what size it was. Now it was important that I got the sizing correct because these cars needed to fit on top of this rollback. I certainly wouldn't want to mistakenly print it too small, wait several days and loads of filament to find out that the cars don't fit properly on the back of it. That would sure suck, right? So once I had the size unmistakably correct, I began coloring it. Now I wanted to use 4 colors so I could adequately test out the multicolor system on a nice long print like this. And this ended up teaching me a couple of things. For starters, something that I kinda knew but didn't really know as well was the Ace is pretty finicky, or at least it can be. But more on that later. But the other issue that I had when doing this print had to do with filament breaking kinda near the tool head, or at least near the collector where the 4 tubes go into the tool head. For some reason, this roll of white Overture PLA just kept breaking off right before the tool head. There would be pieces that would get jammed in the tool head, or it would try and insert into the tool head and get jammed up so it couldn't retract. So basically each time this happened, I had to unscrew that little collector, remove the filament from the tool head, screw it back in, start the print again. Now the print resumed with no issue and it didn't cause any problems with the final product, but this was super annoying and it kept happening over and over again. It was super lame because I couldn't figure out what was causing this to happen, but like the Ace, in the end the problem magically fixed itself and I didn't have to deal with it. It just went away. I didn't change the filament, I didn't change the routing, the problem just fixed itself. And thank goodness that happened because it was getting so annoying walking by this machine, fiddling with it, coming back an hour later, fiddling with it, coming back an hour later. I just wanted to print. All of that aside, the print turned out really well once it sorted itself out. Of course, the amount of purge waste it generated was ridiculous and the purge tower was huge, but the print looked good. And more importantly, the model and prime tower stuck to the bed. They didn't come free at any time during the several-day print. And that was something I was looking out for. If you'll remember back to when we reviewed the Kobra S1, we had a lot of issues with the prime tower coming free from the bed, as well as the models coming free from the bed, but specifically that prime tower would not stick to the bed. So it was a relief to see that this bed did not suffer from those same issues that that machine did. But back to the model itself, like I said, it turned out super great. The surfaces were smooth, we didn't see any ringing artifacts or anything because this wasn't a super shiny PLA like the last one. All the layers stacked really nicely. The only real issue I found again was with the top surface. I think it maybe is a little bit over extruded, so it's rough, but that's probably something that could be tuned out. So for now, this is an excellent result. So I went to give it to my kid, and that's when I realized something hilarious. I didn't scale this up big enough at all. Even after all the thorough testing and scaling and comparing to the other models that I've printed, I still didn't make it right, so I had to reprint it. So reluctantly, I committed several more days to printing this model once again. Luckily, I was met with far fewer Ace issues, and the print kind of went off a lot easier. There was no jamming in the tool head. The only time the machine really stopped was because it ran out of filament. It was a nice change of pace. So 4 short days later, we had a different rollback, properly scaled this time. And again, this one printed without issue for the most part. Now, unfortunately, this is when I started noticing some terrible Z-banding. If you look towards the top of this model, you can see it. Everything in the first bunch of layers looks really good, and then the last couple inches suddenly get super shaky and wobbly. So this kind of indicated to me that maybe something in the motion system had come a little bit loose. And with this print finally being done, it'd probably be a good time to just go over everything and make sure everything's as tight as it's supposed to be. I'm not saying that's what I did at this point, I'm just saying this would have been a good time to go through and make sure everything was tight. So naturally I forgot to do that and I just moved on to printing the biggest multicolor Nacho that I could on this machine. What's the worst that could happen, right? So while that giant multicolor Nacho finish is printing, let's talk about another weakness that I've seen when printing with this machine. And this is probably one of the most glaring, apparent weaknesses that you'll come across if you print with this machine. Sometimes when you print an overhang, the printer struggles to fully stick the layer it's printing to the layer below it. Especially along curved surfaces, you'll see that filament get pulled away from the model. And unfortunately, this is like the most dead consistent thing about this machine. If the overhang's right and the curve is right, this is always going to happen. So looking at the wheels of either the rollbacks I printed, this effect's super apparent, and it's a really good example of what I'm talking about. The slanted layers just don't stick well enough to the previous layers below them, and that line of filament just doesn't get held in place properly. So especially on these curved surfaces, you see this issue, but also it's not exclusive to curved surfaces. You can also have this same problem on the straight path. Looking again at this rollback model, we've got this slight overhang towards the top, but it's straight. This effect's super present. The filament just isn't stuck to the previous layers below it. And it's interesting because this isn't the first time I've seen this. I first noticed this effect when I was reviewing the Kobra S1. It seems to have the same cooling inadequacy or tuning inadequacy or whatever that's causing this to happen. Maybe it's the Anycubic slicer that has some weird secret sauce in there making this happen. I don't know what it is. Let me know in the comments if you had this issue as well, because that's 2 Anycubic machines I've seen this on, so that's probably the common denominator, at least in my experience. Is this something that can just be tuned out? It'd be nice to know. If you've got a model that's all curves, like this Flexi Snake that I tried to print super big, you're out of luck. That's just off the table. You simply cannot print it on this machine. This is what mine looked like. You can tell the model is exclusively curves, and on the lower layers where the overhang was a lot steeper, it didn't stand a chance. So we're doing this giveaway on our second channel where you could win some filaments, some printers, accessories with your printer, all sorts of stuff. And wouldn't you know it, Anycubic offered to give away a KOBRA MAX combo to one of you lucky winners. They already sent it to me. It's already in my possession. So it doesn't matter if I say bad things about their printer in this video or not, they're still gonna give it away to you because they already gave it to me. Anycubic, please continue working with me if I say bad things about your printer. It's still a good printer, I promise. I like it. Don't get me wrong, I like it. But anyway, the only thing that they wanted in exchange for providing this printer for one of you to win for free was for me to do another review video on the KOBRA MAX that I had already purchased. So here we are taking a deeper look. Now, if you want to win this printer, or any of the other printers that were given away, or some filament that were given away, you need to go to our second channel. It's called You Like That. You like that? Yeah, you like that. We put out a challenge video called We Drew Random Filament. Watch that video, listen for the special phrase, and once you've got that phrase, you can fill out the entry form in the description of that video. Once we're at 50,000 views there, the contest will come to a close, the winners will be drawn, and the prizes will be sent out. So watch that video and share it around so we can finally send everything out to you. Okay, so we've had some successful prints. We've had some machine gremlins come along. What's gonna happen now? Well, this is something that I've been wanting to do for quite a while. Ever since I saw that they were putting out this machine, this was the first thing that came to mind. After the rollbacks, I moved on to the giant multicolor Nacho, because of course I need to print the biggest multicolor Nacho I can, right? You like that? I like that. Comment you like that. Now, like I said, I forgot to look over the machine and tighten everything up, so there's going to be Z-banding on this model. I know that, but I've already started the print and we're committed. So, another 4 short days later, yeah, I know, every print's like 4 days. I feel like that's the minimum on this machine. 4 short days later, this print was done. And at the end of this model, it took something like 5 full spools of filament just to make this. It's unfortunate that so much of that filament went into the purge bin instead of into the model, but that's the weakness of this style of multicolor machine, and that's just what we deal with. But even with all that going against me, this model turned out pretty good. It helps that this Chihuahua model is textured, because that kind of covers up any mistakes that the printer might make or anything like that. Overall, this model's pretty forgiving in that regard. And that's lucky, because that Z-banding that we saw in the last print was just as bad on this print, except it was on the entire print, like all the layers, not just the top couple inches. But that wasn't the only issue that we saw with this print. For some reason, there was a lot of color bleed that happened on this one that wasn't present on any other print that I had done with this machine. Because we hadn't seen this on any other print, it was really surprising to come across this now. But again, it wasn't bad enough to like fully ruin it. It just kind of sucked to see it. Now, I still don't have a great explanation as to why this happened now, but again, even that wasn't the only other issue that we had on this print. As you might have guessed it, the overhangs weren't super great either, especially the curved ones. Can you guess what happened here? There were overhang issues everywhere. Anytime the tool head was traveling across a curved surface trying to do an overhang, you better believe that the thing was stringing like crazy and pulling the layers all over the place. It wasn't going to magically get better. I hadn't messed with any settings, so I was expecting that. But again, a little bit of a bummer. I initially thought maybe turning the speed down would help this, so the tool head's not moving quite so fast around that curve, thus maybe not pulling that line of filament away from the model. But this was already a 4-day print, and that potentially would make it a lot more days. I wasn't about to mess with it, but maybe you can, and let me know how that goes. Right, so rough Z-banding, weird color bleeding, terrible overhangs at some points. Even with all that in mind, I'm still pretty impressed with how this turned out. Like, it's still very cool to have this giant multicolor Nacho. Something about holding this giant piece of plastic that came off of a 3D printer and it being multicolor as well, just adding another layer to it, is very cool. And my kid thinks it's awesome. My dog hates it. I mean, really, I'm stoked about this. I'm sure the issues can be remedied in one way or another, or lessened maybe, but even the way that it is right now is great still, at least for me. And I'm pretty picky. So I'm not concerned with the issues. They're definitely there. They're something that you need to be aware of. I'm not a fan of tinkering either. I just want my machine to work out of the box. So if that's you as well, just know that these are things you may contend with. But for me, they're concessions that I'm willing to make. In this case, I think. Now let's fast forward to several prints later. We were still having issues with our ACE unit taking filament periodically. For example, when I was printing the giant multicolor Nacho, for whatever reason, the first bay would not, under any circumstances, take filament at all. It just wouldn't. But the issue didn't present until after I started the print, and then it was jamming in the tool head and causing all sorts of problems there. Lucky for me, I set up bay 4 as a refill bay for bay 1. So when bay 1 runs out, bay 4 will pick up, they're the same color. So what did I do to solve the problem? Took the spool out of bay 1, put it into bay 4, and let the thing keep going. And literally, that took care of that issue. Bay 1 didn't want to play ball. See you later, bay 1, you're out. That's what happens on this channel if you don't want to play ball. We just eliminate you from the equation, buddy. But of course, there was another issue that happened tons of times over the course of that 5-day print. The filament kept breaking close to the tool head in that little collector manifold once again. This was the exact same issue that we saw during the rollback prints earlier, but this time it was way worse. Like, I must have taken that little collector off 10 times during this one print. A couple of you math kids out there will know that that's twice a day at least. When I boil it down to twice a day, it doesn't seem like that much, but this was super annoying. I mean, if it wasn't pieces jammed in the tool head that had broken, it was on the other end at the ace where the filament was getting bound up and broken, and it was constant. We had seen this once or twice during other prints, but this was relentless and so very annoying. I reached out to Anycubic letting them know I was having this issue, and they sent me a link to their wiki, which provided a reasonable amount of documentation. I was surprised to see so much documentation. So at least they're documenting these kinds of things, and there's a troubleshooting guide to get you through these issues. And luckily none of these issues caused actual problems with my prints, like it didn't cause any failures or any artifacts from starting and stopping. because if it had, that would have sucked so much. Unfortunately, that did mean I had to be diligent about checking this machine to make sure there wasn't an error. So every time I walked by, I just tapped the screen to make sure, because it wasn't always notifying me on the app that the machine had stopped or encountered an error. And this is a disadvantage of having a machine that's cheaper, so to speak. That filament path isn't riddled with 70 billion sensors like you find on the H2D, for example. So the machine doesn't know exactly what's going on with the filament in between the ace where there's a sensor and the tool head where there's a sensor. And these things are going to happen. It would be cool if they somehow added some of the smarts across this machine, but made it more expensive. Now, maybe I just like it cheap. I'll come back to you on that one. But ultimately, that lack of feedback for the machine puts a bit of a damper on the customer experience. You have to pick up the slack where the machine doesn't know what's happened. So investigate and stay on top of it, and you too can have giant multicolored nachos after 5 days of printing and $100 worth of filament. It's easy. All right, Anycubic wanted me to let you know that in addition to the giveaway they're doing with us, they're doing giveaways on their own as well. As part of their 10th anniversary celebration, they're going to be giving away stuff in between August and October, and that's about as much information as I have about it. But I will have more information in the description. So if you don't win the Anycubic machine that you want from our giveaway, you should check out their social media so you can figure out what they're giving away. It's free printers. Everybody's doing it. For my final test, I really wanted to stress this machine out because for some reason I hadn't had enough issues. We're doing a full plate of little tiny nachos. And I'm just gonna cut myself off and start by saying this was a dumb idea. This was silly. I recognize that. But this is the internet and I wanted to do this testing because normally I wouldn't do this on my own. But for you people, so you can see what happens, I'll make that sacrifice. So these little tiny nacho models, what's the deal? I use this a lot when I'm testing out machines. Well, I throw one of these guys into each one of my Etsy orders. And the idea of being able to print hundreds at a time was very intriguing. Also, spreading out the purge waste from color changes across 250 models instead of like 70 means each one of these gets a little bit cheaper, kinda. Of course, that's if we don't have a bunch of them detach and cause bigger failures across the plate. Wouldn't that be a bummer? The print started off well enough, and I really wanted to pay attention to this first layer. Now, some of the models looked like they had little bits of gaps, maybe some under extrusion or something happening in between each filament pass. But overall, every single one of the models had a successful first layer, or first couple layers. I wasn't expecting that at all. I figured something would have failed immediately with this many models on this big of a plate. So I was surprisingly optimistic. And then the print continued. So honestly, I didn't expect every one of these models to survive, and sure enough, the little nachos began detaching one by one. At first it was slow, and it was just a few, and then it was a lot. That few turned into a bunch, and a bunch turned into a lot more. Every time one of them failed, the surrounding ones began to fail as the filament was building up, and I can already hear you commenting. What about object exclusion? Why didn't you just go in and delete the ones that failed? I don't have a good answer for that. I probably should have just done that. But again, this is the internet. Let's just see what happens. So this was a total disaster, as you might expect, and again, I was expecting that to happen to a degree. It was bad enough that when my wife would walk by, she was asking why I was continuing to let the machine run. And to her credit, normally I would have shut it down and cut my losses because these things were starting to fall off at quite an alarming rate. But for science and for the sake of showing you what would happen, we pressed on. Now it's worth mentioning this shouldn't reflect poorly on the printer. I would say this is no fault of the machine as much as it is this isn't something that you would naturally try and do. It's a lot to ask of a printer, and if I was going to do this, I would use a brim or some mouse ears, or I would plan for the fact that this is so much to ask of a printer. I mean, these models are tiny, and they don't have a very reliable contact patch. It makes sense that they're going to come free. But ultimately, the casualties weren't as bad as I was expecting. I think it was like 80 out of the 215 or so that didn't survive, which again isn't good, but it's not as bad as I expected for how big of a disaster this was. So what do I think of this printer? On one hand, there's really no hiding several of the prominent issues that it has. It's not a perfect machine. There's a lot of fiddling around that needs to happen to keep the thing printing, and typically that's just not my jam. If you want this printer to work for you, you may have to babysit it a little bit. It might require some gentle massaging to keep it running every now and then. You may find it in a bad mood, and you have to offer up some gentle words of encouragement to keep it running on the right path. And this can be frustrating, for sure. But on the other hand, this printer does something that not many other printers do. I would argue no other printers do. This thing prints big, and it prints multicolor. It's not the biggest machine out there. It's not the only multicolor machine out there. But it is probably the most affordable way to print up to 8 colors on a build plate that's that big. You're probably not going to find another machine that can check those boxes. So filtering through that lens, it's pretty impressive that this combination of features even works as well as it does. And I need to remind you, this is happening on a machine that's less than $700. If you think about it that way, it is pretty staggering what they're able to accomplish in this machine. So thanks to Anycubic for partnering with us on our giveaway. If you haven't yet, go watch the We Draw Random Filaments video on our second channel, which is called Ya Like That. I'll have the video link below, I'll have the channel link below. Also, if you want to get yourself a KOBRA Max, check out the link in the description of this video. You too could print super giant things that cost a lot of filament, because when you scale things this big, it costs a lot of filament. Bye!